Welcome to the Mailtime Podcast. I am joined today by Jonathan Pollard, who is in the news today after he met with Ambassador Mike Huckabee. It was just featured in the New York Times story. For those who are unaware of Jonathan Pollard's story, in the mid 80s, he pled guilty to spying on behalf of Israel uh, within the United States. He served 30 years before having his sentence commuted by President Barack Obama, and was a resident of Manhattan thereafter, before moving to Israel, I believe in
Right.
2020. Is that correct?
2020. Right.
2020. So, Mr. Pollard, thank you so much for taking the time here.
My pleasure, Daniel.
I have less interest in going back and forth on everything you ever did or anything you ever said and the specifics about who knew what in 1985. That's If anyone wants to check that out, please go on YouTube. You've spoken about that at length. There's a lot of material there. I want to go straight to the point about this New York Times article. You met with Ambassador Mike Huckabee. Why did you meet with him?
Um, I had reached out to him through my lawyers for a meeting. Why? It was a very simple personal reason. On the one hand, I wanted to thank him as um honestly as I could for everything that he had done on my behalf when I was when I was in prison. And on the other hand, I wanted to extend my heartfelt appreciation for his kindness and his consideration towards my wife, Esther, Alea Shalom. Um, he really was a gentleman towards her, and he tried to help her as much as he could. That basically um, was my reason for wanting to see him. Now, were other things discussed? There were pleasantries discussed, but those were the only matters of substance that transpired between us. Now, when I was contacted bolt out of the blue by the New York Times, I was somewhat surprised because they're a newspaper that I don't exactly like, and never in my wildest dreams would consider giving an interview. But something told me it was important that I do talk to them. And after discussing, my possible run for the Knesset, um, the subject of the interview became very clear, and that was the Huckabee meeting. Now, it was very clear to me, Daniel, that there was somebody in the embassy who had contacted a superior, perhaps back in Washington, and that person had contacted the New York Times. It was clear that whoever contacted uh, or made this meeting, that made their superior in Washington aware of the meeting, didn't know the substance of the meeting. They were not privy to the meeting. They weren't present, and they really hadn't heard anything about it, except for the fact that the meeting had been held. It was clear to me also at the time of the interview that the meeting was going to be used as a weapon against the ambassador, perhaps to have him recalled.
You're actually
And I
seeing
got
that
this from the
on
substance
Twitter right now.
of the interview. Right. It's quite clear. In my guess, as far as who may have been involved in this matter, I think is centered on the CIA station at the embassy.
I would
They
guess that the
really
CIA.
haven't been
I would guess
replaced.
that the CIA station probably hates you.
Yeah, and when they became aware of it, I think they organized this hit on the ambassador. You have to understand. I have a lot of disagreements with President Trump, but there's one thing that we're both in agreement on, and that is that the CIA needs to be purged completely from top to bottom, from leftist progressive holdovers going back to the Obama administration, certainly the Biden administration. I don't trust the CIA. They're not friends of Israel. I know this, unfortunately, from personal experience. And so this story now is, I believe, part of their effort to have the ambassador removed. Now, does do I not think that maybe there are others in the embassy who should also be replaced? Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of holdovers at the embassy from the Obama administration. And of course, any one of them could be the player that we're talking about right now. But my guess is that it's somebody from the CIA station.
So if
Um,
I understand correctly, you went to meet with Ambassador Huckabee at the time that you were imprisoned. He was Governor Huckabee of Arkansas. He was very
he was.
vocal.
I never met him.
Right, but he was very
Right. I never
vocal.
met
He
him.
was very vocal in support of your cause,
Right.
and you wanted to say thank you to
Correct.
him for helping encourage people to petition on your behalf.
Correct. Full stop.
How many people were in the meeting?
That's it. There were two other people, my lawyer and the ambassador's assistant.
Now, it's important to note that I mean, and the New York Times identified him as David Milstein. He's Mark Levin's son-in-law, and he actually came under withering criticism from Tucker Carlson and that ilk, who, not surprisingly, well, I should say, knowing that they have been open, they being Tucker Carlson and those in his circle, saying that Christian Zionism is heresy and have been very
Correct.
critical of what they're claiming is prioritization.
Well, you should, Daniel. You should know that Milstein's name came up in the interview, and I reacted rather forcefully to the insinuation, not by the Times, but by people feeding information to the Times that he was somehow unreliable.
Well, look, I mean, look,
And my comment
Tucker Carlson has spent 40 minutes, basically a full podcast, going after David Milstein. It's clearly that the people in that camp do not like David Milstein, and they're making a point to try to go after him. They're trying to go after Mark Levin. They're trying to go after Ambassador Huckabee. I don't think that's
well,
really,
the point
yeah.
that I made to the Times was that based on everything I know about David, he is a 101% American patriot. He believes strongly in the administration. He subscribes to the notion of America first. And certainly every time I have heard him talk or I've been around him when he is talking, uh, he does everything he can to uphold the principles of of the Trump administration. Now, Tucker Carlson and his ilk, I'm well aware of what he's been trying to do to David. Carlson had a show devoted almost entirely to me, which involved lies from the beginning till the end. And you know, it's hard. I asked my lawyers in New York whether I could sue him for defamation or slander or something, and they said no. He would absolutely like that. It would kind of give him extra oxygen, if you will, to propound his insanity. But it's still something that I'm considering right now because, at least with me, the stuff that was pouring out of his mouth and out of the mouth of his guests was just ludicrous. I mean, it was insanity. It was kind of like a Candace Owens type discussion about what I may or may not have done during the course of my activities on behalf of Israel.
Now, I don't want to
So
I don't want to get dragged
the
into too
fact
many of
that
the details on it. But what was the main thing that he said that was particularly wrong?
about David,
No, I'm saying you talked that you're talking about potentially suing Tucker Carlson for defamation. I don't want to get into,
yeah,
well,
I
this
mean,
person said this in
he claimed,
1986. But
okay, he
what was the
claimed,
most?
No, no, no,
obscene
no, no,
thing he
no.
claimed,
Put
right?
them, he claimed that the information that I had provided Israel wound up in the Soviet Union, in Russia, and that had been used against the United States, leading to the death of agents and the compromise of collection activities and everything else. And I mean, there's no proof. The whole thing is a put up job, and even
He's basically trying to make you out
the
to be Robert Hansen.
correct,
Okay.
correct,
And for those who don't know, Robert Hansen actually led to people getting executed because he fed information to the Soviet
correct.
Union and then to
And
Russia.
Aldrich Ames, the
Right,
same.
correct. Okay,
Yeah,
understood.
right. Same thing.
Understood.
So
Um,
when David's name came up during this interview, I was, let's just say, I was not surprised.
so some of the stuff, and now I want to get into where some of the other hot water stuff you've said in this interview and other interviews. I'm saying your interview with the Times, like for example, people on X I'm seeing are commenting that you claim to be Israel first. You're not in Israeli politics yet. I know you've said you're planning to run that in the Jerusalem Post. You have a different plan and other things like
Correct.
that. What politician of any country would not be insert country first? I don't like why is that even remotely controversial? I would expect that any Israeli politician would be Israel first, as I would expect any
In
American
no,
politician. No, you're
you
okay.
would
You're
expect any
you're talking
American politician.
you're talking about in practice, right? I'm not talking about whether or not um, various politicians in the Israeli political sphere actually put what people would define as Israel's best interest forward. But I don't think nobody who is in politics should be prioritizing the wants and needs of another country over their own country. That would just be a normal behavior from a politician.
Unfortunately, that's what's happened in Israel right now. We have the majority of the politicians, starting with Bibi Netanyahu on down, basically compromising our independence for any number of reasons. Uh, and what we've seen now with his kind of craven behavior towards President Trump and this 21-point peace plan, Bibi has literally subordinated our interests to those of another country. Most of the other politicians here follow suit, not surprisingly, because a lot of them are just plain scared. And they feel that unless we have a rock solid relationship with the United States, in which we are basically protected by the United States or even subordinated to the United States in kind of a vassal type relationship, that we have no chance of surviving in this region. And I totally reject that view. This is kind of like what I call a galut mentality, a diasporic mentality that doesn't take into account the resources, material and spiritual resources that we have in this country.
So
So this is why when
I
I make
agree.
the
If I was
statement,
right, but if I were Israeli, if I was in your shoes, like right, I understand where you're coming from and why you would want Israel to be independent, which leads me
I am
to
not I am not anti-American, far from it. But when
no,
I've been
I
asked, for
understand. I
example,
understand what you're saying. What my point is I'm trying to reconcile that analysis of the current situation with your analysis that Trump sold out Israel for Saudi Arabia. In my view, because Israel has for decades put itself in a position when dependence on foreign aid, dependence on these these agreements with other countries when it comes to defense and fundamental things when it comes to the state of Israel, I think it is well within President Trump's right to ask Israel to do essentially whatever he wants because Israel has created that situation. That's where I have trouble reconciling your analysis of what the current situation looks like.
no,
And
I agree with you. I agree with you. The problem is the problem started actually recently on October 8th, when the whole issue of the day after was never answered by Bibi Netanyahu. He punted. And politics, as in nature, abhors a vacuum. and we were all very scared about, that if we didn't define what the day after would be in terms that would be of benefit to us, narrowly defined, someone else would, whether it was the American president or anyone else for that matter. Now, as far as what President Trump has done, as far as,
Wait a
look,
sec. Before we get there,
President
just
Trump, President Trump,
pause one
yeah,
second. October 7th, Yoav Gallant has said that when he realized what was going on, he called Lloyd Austin and he said, "Don't we? I know we were sending munitions to Ukraine. We need those 50,000 pieces of munitions back." Something along those lines. That's what he said publicly. I would argue that the real problem actually started, if you're going to talk post October 7th, it actually was on October 7th. The idea that for you to actually properly
no
defend your
problem,
borders,
no question.
then you've already put yourself in a position of begging and pleading with the United States, which encourages weakness.
We don't have a problem. We don't have a disagreement on that issue. The fact of the matter is, when President Trump released all the equipment that had been basically embargoed by the Biden administration and told Bibi, get on with it, he opened the door politically and materially for us to go ahead and do what we thought was best in our interests with regard to Hamas. I'm not blaming President Trump for what ultimately happened. It was Bibi Netanyahu's fault, and it was the General Staff Forum of the Israel Defense Force that were at fault for mismanaging the war in Gaza. Now, for President Trump, we understand that his objective and his agenda is to act as the president of the United States. That's who he serves. He's elected, and he serves at the interests of the United States. I'm not questioning his loyalty to the United States. The problem I have is that when you make yourself a vassal, shouldn't be so confused or surprised when people act accordingly on that. And so right now we find ourselves in a horrendous situation with regard not just to Gaza, but to Hezbollah in the north, to the Houthis, to Turkey, to Egypt, to Iran, to Qatar. It's a mess. We haven't really won on any of the fronts that we're facing, including the front in Yehuda and Shamron.
Right. So can you see
When the
though how
president,
can you understand how Americans object, myself included, when you say, and this is a quote you gave the New York Times, said madman who has literally sold us down the drain for Saudi gold in reference to.
correct, is from our standpoint, he is
Right.
okay. To many of us here, I'd say to most of us here, the behavior of the president lately, specifically with regard to Qatar and with regard to Saudi Arabia and with regard to postponing the demilitarization, the disarmament, if you will, of Hamas, is sheer madness. If you look at the 21-point peace plan that he's come out with, it's based on, it's delusional. From our standpoint, it's delusional. It's not going to work. They've tried variation.
Now, is it possible to get better Wi-Fi?
I've got a good Wi-Fi connection here. I mean, I'm getting,
Oh,
everything is fine.
oh, okay.
Everything is fine.
It's just breaking up. Okay, so you're
Um,
saying that from your perspective, the peace plan is crazy when it comes to Gaza. My only question is, then why did Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli government agree to it? Like, what if Trump is pushing it forward?
because Bibi Netanyahu is compromised. He's
So,
weak.
but I'm saying is your
He can't
objections
pull
to
the.
Bibi. It's not to Trump.
No, I can have objections to both. The plan that was put forward is honestly is delusional. But as far as Bibi is concerned, he set us up for the imposition of this plan. So my from a political standpoint here, my objective is to bring people's attention to the fact that this guy, Bibi Netanyahu, needs to go and be replaced by an authentic Jewish nationalist that understands how an independent country should act, and who is dedicated to military self-sufficiency. Now, believe it or not, the Heritage Foundation, which has come out under a lot of criticism lately because of its president's refusal to outright condemn Tucker Carlson and others, actually came out this year with a very, very credible program for Israel's rearmament. And unfortunately, those people in Israel, which like to be dependent on the United States for one reason or another, immediately rejected it. And they misrepresented it as the Heritage Foundation's effort to cut off military supplies, U.S. military supplies to Israel. And it was nothing of the sort. All the Heritage Foundation said was the U.S. should increase help for Israel for a given period of time so that they could use those funds to become militarily self-sufficient and thereby become a genuine ally of, and not a dependency of the United States. I'm totally in agreement with that. And I wish more people would actually look at what the Heritage Foundation said about changing the MOU that's being worked on now for the next tranche of military assistance for Israel. You have to see things from where we are here. And when President Trump imposes, because we're not fighting back, imposes a peace plan that is very dangerous to us and calls, for example, for the eventual creation of a Palestinian terrorist state right next to us, it's more than frightening. It's something that's our worst nightmare realized.
I don't
When I
disagree.
walk down
Oh,
the
sorry.
street, yeah, when I walk down the street, I mean, I have children, so I mean, I have to be constantly concerned with the possibility of some maniac coming after them with a knife or a gun or a bomb. And this is why, if you look at the last polling that was done a few days ago, nearly nearly 70% of the Israeli populace totally reject the idea of a Palestinian state. Well, when Bibi Netanyahu congratulates the president on the passage of his peace plan at the UN, everybody here was saying, is Bibi out of his mind? Because when Bibi keeps pointing to the disarmament clauses, when Hamas says they're not going to disarm, and the president is saying, well, okay, we can kind of postpone that. And there's another big part of this plan that calls for a pathway to Palestinian statehood. People here are, I think I'm not exaggerating by saying, enraged at Bibi and his government, but also at President Trump and his administration for trying to ram this down our throats. Now, what the president wants to do with Saudi Arabia is his business. But if he actually wants to abide by this agreement to assure our qualitative military edge, then what he's doing is counter to that. When he makes a statement about you cannot annex the West Bank, first of all, it's not the West Bank. Even the American State Department refers to it correctly as Judea and Samaria. He's actually breaking American law. I've pointed this out here, and people kind of now understand what I'm talking about. There's the 1924 Anglo-American Treaty, and that treaty says point blank that Judea and Samaria are Jewish. That's law. That's American law. It may be old, it may be from the 1920s, but it's standing law, accepted law. The president just can't go and say you can't do this or you can't do that when it's in violation of American law. If he wants to abrogate the treaty, then take it to the Senate and have them abrogate it, and good luck with that. But that's the law. So these are things that people here look at and say, where is this guy coming from? Doesn't he understand that if you give the Saudis these jets, the same ones that we get, where's the incentive that they have to reach some accommodation with us? You've just taken the incentive away. So I was asked today on several news stations in Israel, what should we have done? What should we have asked the president for as terms of compensation? And there's a very simple thing we could have done. And I've tried to push this idea here, both in the Ministry of Defense and in the political arena. Offer the Americans to build a factory here. We pay for it ourselves, and we pay for the workers to co-produce the F-47, the new American fighter, the air superiority fighter, and that we would produce for the United States as well. We would buy in cash what we wanted and basically produce for the United States. So they would have a second assembly line, if you will. And everybody looks at me and says, okay, fine, that would be fair. I mean, we're actually going to provide the Americans free of charge with a new assembly line, and that we would have an F-47 eventually, and that would be far superior to the F-35. So it's a wash. Go ahead and have the Saudis buy the F-35. We would co-produce the successor to the F-35, and everybody should be happy. Well, unfortunately, when you're dealing here with what I call aid addicts, these guys don't think this way. They come with their hands, outstretched, begging for peanuts. Please give us something. And so when this whole issue of the F-35 came up, and there was no issue of linkage to the Abraham Accords, no real linkage, or by the Americans, or for that matter, appropriate compensation that both the United States and Israel could benefit from. I mean, we have a total failure on the part of our government right now to act professionally. And I had hoped, and I made this statement here to a lot of people, that the Americans would actually force us to grow up. And that's where the Heritage Foundation's plan was very helpful, because that plan would force us to grow up. Look, I'm sure this is going to come out sooner or later, but I made statements here before the election, the American election, that I wouldn't be unhappy. I mean, it was half facetious. I wouldn't be unhappy if Kamala Harris won the election, God forbid. And people looked at me like I was insane. And they said, why? And I said, because her election would force us to grow up and become an independent country, a country that could be a reliable, helpful ally to the United States, as opposed to what we are right now, a dependency. So,
Can I interject for 1 second?
sure.
I agree with you in terms of Israel being essentially the 51st state, having given up its ability to establish its own foreign policy and overdependence on aid, specifically from the United States, the dependence on American support geopolitically. I agree with that analysis. I The way I interpret it after we can establish that we agree on that analysis is I just object to Israelis name calling, whether that's Kushner or Witkoff or Trump, on the basis that this is the bed that Israel made, and now America needs to do what's in American interests. And where they overlap with Israel,
No
that's
question.
fantastic. So I just object to the name calling. You've leveled some pretty harsh
The,
things.
I've
But
been
again, it's
asked,
not all I'm saying is like I think that in American interest, they should do what's best for America. And if Israel has created a situation in which they essentially just have to say yes to whatever is going on, that's that's on Israel. That's not America's fault. Yeah. So I'm saying is
can you see
that's
me
not
now?
yeah, but I'm saying I don't blame Trump. I don't blame Kushner. I don't blame Witkoff because this is the bed that Israel made, and Israel and America is in the driver's seat.
That is obviously true, but it's where the driver is taking us. That's the issue for me. during the height
But if
of
you
the
want, but if you want to do that
anti-judicial,
though,
during the height of the
go ahead.
during the height of the anti-judicial reform movement here, where we were paralyzed, the left or the Capitalists, whatever you want to call them, were tearing this country apart. And I made statements at the time that I hoped that a better administration, particularly one under President Trump, would impose a degree of sanity on our country by telling whoever was the prime minister, grow up and apply the law. When people block highways and try to shut down airports and stop the train system, you have laws on the books that should be applied uniformly. Arrest these people, try them, convict them, and imprison them. And the only person I could see doing this would be President Trump. Why? Because he was victimized by the same aristocracy that is victimizing us here in our country. We don't have a democracy here, not by a long shot. Yes, the Knesset sits and passes legislation, which is either accepted or not by a bunch of unelected black robe judges sitting presumably as our betters. And what they do to this country is make a mockery out of the notion that we are a democracy. We are not. So I was hoping, and I was publicly expressing this fact, that a president would come in and set things right for us because we're failing. So when the president, for example, here's where it gets sticky, makes statements that the prosecution is going after Bibi, for example, for political reasons, not judicial reasons, not appropriately judicial reasons. He's right. And when he sends the ambassador to a courtroom to voice the American administration's hope that this charade will end, judicial charade will end, great. And when there's talk of perhaps at one point of the administration actually sanctioning financially the judges in this case, in Bibi's case, here I am, and as Israel firster, okay, someone that's fighting desperately to establish our independence, saying, okay, good. Now, this is not hypocritical on my part. It's not inconsistent on my part, because part of our independence will be the ability to actually function as a legitimate democracy where the will of the people rules. Well, we don't have that. So when President Trump has said all these things about how bad the situation is here and how it's important that it change, good. I like that. Okay. And I've said so publicly, repeatedly, and which has gotten me into a lot of hot water here, because they say, well, what kind of independence guy are you when you're asking a foreign country to come in and basically change the high court? Well, we need that. And it's only a person like President Trump, who has been grossly mistreated by a politicized judicial system, who could actually understand what's happening here and help us. And in spite of everything that I've said opposed to his Middle East policy, I am still hoping and praying that he will put the hammer down as far as the juristocracy, to end the juristocracy in this country and let us be a real democracy. We can't be an effective ally of the United States if we're militarily dependent on the United States, okay. J.D. Vance said it best when he went to Europe, and he criticized the Europeans on his first trip to Europe because of their lack of democratic accountability. And boy, he was 101% right. And I was hoping and praying, and I tried to communicate with him through other people. Please come to Israel and say the same thing. exactly what you said in Europe to those idiots at the EU. Please come here and say the same thing. That's all you need to do. And it would put the fear of God into these progressive, woke leftists here that are wrecking our country. But that never happened for reasons. I mean, I don't know why, but it just never happened. So I am not saying that the Trump administration is 101% horrible for Israel. If the agreement had been, for example, that we would do and say, here, whatever the president wanted us to do in order to get the living hostages out, and then drop the hammer on them, fine, no problem. But that isn't what happened. And there's enough guilt to go around on both sides on this matter. So I'm not focusing my anger or my disappointment in one direction. This is why on October 7th, Daniel, when I looked at the GoPro of the Nukba terrorists and what they were doing to our people in the Gaza envelope communities, something fundamentally changed in me. Up until that point, I thought that my abandonment and betrayal by the Israeli government was an exception to the rule, that I was somehow an outlier. But after looking at those videos for hours, I suddenly realized that everyone in our country, everyone, had been abandoned and betrayed by the Israeli military and by the political establishment, left, right, and center. And that's when I decided to possibly get into politics, because somebody has to stop this rot.
So I agree with
Whenever I
with a
talk
lot of
about,
your analysis of what's going on in Israel. My fundamental disagreement with you is just the way to communicate that vis-a-vis America, in the sense that I think Israel has put itself in a horrendous situation for a number of the things that you laid
granted,
out. I agree with you. I just think that Israel has to be looking inward. Like, for example, right? Let's take the Biden and what you'll say is the arms embargo, right? I don't actually get mad as someone who values American interests. I'm not mad at President Biden. I'm looking to Israel and saying to the Ministry of Defense, who, by the way, the head of the Ministry of Defense is now the head of the IDF, Ayal Zamir. I'm saying, what the heck were you doing for the last 2 decades? Why were you sending
correct,
ceremonial ambulances and munitions to Ukraine when you didn't have enough munitions to defend yourself? That is moronic. So,
correct.
what I'm
During
saying,
during
but wait, but what I'm saying though is I think Israel has to be, and when I say Israel, I'm saying the people that are thinking outside the box in Israel, yourself included, call it the Israel firsters, the actual Israel firsters, not what the people are saying are Israel firsters. But I think that the focus needs to be inward, and that what the heck is Israel doing? And then America is doing what is best for American interests. And I'll give you another example. There are people that approached senators and governors asking for help for munitions, saying, "Hey, I think that Israel needs XYZ after October 7th." And the response from the Ministry of Defense, and a lot of times, was, "No, no, no, we have this under control." So it you can only help people as far as they want to be helped. And I think that just the frustration.
You know what? I
Yeah.
when I'm listening to you right now, I'm hearing an echo of what I've said here.
Correct, but
Um,
my only disagreement
a
is
few
saying
weeks
things
ago,
about Kushner or Witkoff or Trump, because I think they're
these
acting as is defined by their interests, and Israel has encouraged them to do that.
look. This is why when I see Witkoff in particular, and I understand who his paymaster is, okay, in Doha, and I see Israelis literally, well, figuratively, kissing his ass here, and then quietly saying, "Oh my God, the guy is absolutely corrupt." Behind the scenes, he's a terrible guy. And my response is, why don't you say that publicly and offer an alternative course of action? 2 weeks ago, I had a very detailed meeting with people from the Ministry of Defense and the military industrial community here, where I laid out in excruciating detail a course of action for military self sufficiency. And when I finished, after about an hour, I asked, "Are there any comments on this?" And everybody looked around. One general raised his hand and he said, "We have to ask the Americans first whether this is okay to do anything that you just laid out." And I just put my hand up to my head and I said, "Is this what we've waited for 2,000 years to see? That we're slaves? Is this it?" And I never got an answer.
Let me give you an example from the beginning of the war. It
I
was
understand. I
when people
understand that the Americans have their own.
let me just say, when
I,
people were helping Israel and trying to make sure that the IDF soldiers had the proper equipment, and they kept going back to, oh, well, there's only certain helmets that can come from America. And then eventually it became clear Israel didn't even have a helmet testing facility in the IDF. The only way they could actually even test if their helmets worked were from America. You are a
correct.
country surrounded by people that want to murder you, and you don't even have a facility to ensure that the equipment you're giving your own soldiers works. You have to go to America. That is pathetic.
Daniel, when the war started and it became obvious that Hamas had used very effectively drones to take out some of our defensive capability along the Gaza border, I asked a simple question: who is it in the Ministry of Defense that has been watching and analyzing the drone warfare in Ukraine? And the answer I got, it's not going to shock you, but the answer I got was that one junior officer who had a secondary assignment to just keep an eye on what was going on in the Ukraine. I didn't believe it. I said, you're mistaken. You're lying. This can't be the case. And no, I was told the truth. To this day, I am fighting with, that's all I do: argue, fight, try to convince people that warfare as we know it has fundamentally changed since the war in Ukraine started, mostly because of the drone warfare on land and at sea. And at a recent exercise that took place in the Judea and Samaria with two divisions of our divisions there, it was a complete failure to take into account the effect that attack drones would have on the soldiers. And I asked for details. I got details, and I said none of the tanks, none of the armored personnel carriers had what's called cope cages that you see all the time in Ukraine. Nope, not one, not one. The soldiers, do they have the smash gear that would allow an infantryman to take out a drone? Nope, nobody had it. We export it, but we don't have it in the army. I could go on with this, but
I've spent many podcasts going on about these kinds of issues as someone who wants the American ally Israel to grow up. I would love to see Israel grow up, put on its big boy pants, stop
that's
begging
my
for.
term. No, that's my term. I
Okay,
said that it's
so
time for us
yeah,
to put on our big boy pants.
like I think
The
I think a
short
lot of
pants
these
don't work
organizations,
anymore.
for example, a lot of the organizations have to have wind down clauses. Like when are some of the programs from JNF and others going to have a wind down saying, "Oh, Israel's going to be at its 100-year anniversary, so it should not take donations because it doesn't need donations." How about be
Correct.
acting like an adult? And you and I agree. I I'm just going to say, yeah, I think that given your history, given your past, and again, as I told you before we recorded here, I don't back away. You don't back away. That's fine. I just think, given your history and given the lack of leadership from the Israeli defense establishment, otherwise, it's just a delicate balance in objecting to certain policy issues and how Israelis talk about American politicians simply because Israel is dependent on America, and I think that it's best for both countries for that not to be the case, but it's what it is right now. Given what it is right now, it's going to invite all sorts of uh, complicated discussions, and I think it's just best to not attack
I
some
am
of the leadership.
trying very
You know,
hard to scare a lot of people here by what I say, because the only way we are going to be independent is if some of us are successful in breaking this galut mentality that we have here. So when I criticize the United States, um, Trump administration in particular, and some of their representatives in the region, and people are horrified and they tell me, no, 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 don't say this, because you're going to anger the Americans and who
by the
knows
way,
what the
I'm not horrified. I'm just saying that I think it's misdirected because
No, 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 no.
yeah,
People here,
yeah, sure,
I'm telling you
yeah,
what
sure.
the reality is here. And I asked them, why are you so scared of what I'm saying? And they're saying, they'll cut us off. There'll be repercussions. And I said, okay. And in the event we are cut off, what are our options at that point? That's where I use this analogy of we have to put our big boy pants on. And if I tell people, if you want to be an ally of the United States, a valued ally of the United States, which I do, then we have to act differently. And I can't, with a lot of the politicians here, I just can't get their attention. And so they say the same things I do, except privately. And I look at them and I say, well, what good is this? You're telling me this and telling me to be quiet, but you agree with me and that what's the point of this? If you have an objection to the Trump administration's 21-point plan, then put something better ahead. But you didn't. So now you're complaining to me quietly off camera for something that I'm complaining about publicly, but you're not willing to make the changes necessary in this country to make us a valuable, independent ally of the United States. Every day I am having arguments like this with people.
I just want to say here, it's similar to the conversation about American aid to Israel. I think that the America First crowd that knows how much Israel offers to America
No,
should have made that case before the anti-Semites started making that case.
agreed.
Now the conversation is, oh, well, these crazy people like Nick Fuentes want to stop aid to Israel, and you agree with this crazy person? No, the proactive America First people who know how much America benefits from Israel and vice versa should have made the case to stop aid, to stop
Agreed.
acting like supplying a heroin addict long
Daniel,
before the anti-Semites did it.
agreed. Look at what the Heritage Foundation
Right.
proposed.
But I'm
I
saying
took
even
the
that's too late. This should
No, no,
I
no.
spoke to
It
people about this
wasn't.
a decade ago.
It was okay, but dealing with what the Heritage Foundation, they came out with this before the president actually assumed office. And I immediately brought this document to the attention of the Ministry of Defense, the Knesset Foreign Affairs Defense Committee here, and God knows who else. God knows who else. And I said, please talk to these people at the Heritage Foundation and try to operationalize this idea they have of making us militarily self sufficient. And they looked at me like I was from Mars. From Mars. So, look, this is why, look, if I were in President Trump's position and, you know, MBS came to me and said, we're going to invest $600 billion in American businesses. We want to buy for cash X number of F-35s and, whatever else they want, maybe F-15EXs or whatever else. And then I, as the president, looked at the Israelis and said, you guys are standing by the side of the road with your hat in your hands, looking for a handout. I'm sorry. I was elected to be the president of the United States to serve the best interests of my country and to safeguard the livelihood of the workers in this country, the defense workers, for example. Okay, did we ask for compensation in a way or in a form that would be beneficial to both the United States and Israel that I laid out? No, no, we didn't. So you have to understand here that there's an on and off politically. That when someone like me goes out and addresses crowds, they don't want to hear evasions. They don't want to hear temperance. They don't want to hear um, a compromised position on my part, or a position that understands the other side. They want me to break some windows. And the only way I can do that is what I'm doing now. It may not sound or feel comfortable, let's say, for someone in the United States to hear this, but I'm principally addressing people here who have been so brainwashed and misled ever since this state was created in 1948, recreated, that there's no other way of breaking this mold or this mindset that people have of dependency. And they're shocked. What do you mean the president wants to have a pathway to a Palestinian state? What do you mean that he's going to rethink the idea of Hamas disarmament? What do you mean he's just going to sell F-35s to the Saudis without any consideration to the effect on us, the qualitative military edge, the QME? I mean, what? And they keep asking all these questions in very negative, derogatory terms, like, how could our father, sell us into slavery? That's what it sounds like. And I just sit there saying, how? You let it happen. You did. And you should remember this the next time you go to the polls to vote. And then, all hell comes down on my head.
I hear before we wrap here, I just want to address one thing going back to how we started this conversation. What do you have to say to the crowd that sees, and I mean, I was looking at some of the commentary on the New York Times article. What do you have to say to the crowd that says, "Oh, look, a traitor met with the ambassador from the United States to Israel"? What's your response to that?
First of all, I was never accused, convicted, or sentenced as a traitor. My indictment, and I want people to understand this, that nobody ever pays attention to what I was indicted for. My indictment reads that I was guilty of an unauthorized transfer of classified material to a major non-NATO state, in parenthesis, a non-NATO ally, in parenthesis, Israel, without intent to harm the United States. That's what it says. I was never charged with treason. I was never accused. I was never indicted. I was never sentenced for treason. And, I try to point this out to people, even in my first appeal to the Washington, D.C. Circuit. The three judges, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, in fact, was the chief judge of the triumvirate, raked the government over the coals for allowing this slander to exist. All three judges asked the government point blank, do you know the damage that you did by not refuting this false charge? Yes. The government, I mean, you read the transcript of the 2251 hearing, and a lot of it had to do with this false charge of treason. So the only thing I can say is look at what I was indicted for.
That's a good answer.
To harm are there. And in the criminal law, you know this, Daniel, in criminal law, intent is everything. And so it says without intent to harm the United States. I never did. I never intended to harm the United States. Look, one of the things, in conclusion, one of the things that was asked of me by my control officer, Rafi Atan, was he wanted me to get the names of all of the American agents in Israel. And I said, no, I can't do that. So his answer to me was, one of them is going to kill you. I said, so be it. And that's how I got caught. There was a CIA agent in the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee that found out about me, and that was it. So people have to be very careful when they throw around this charge of treason that's totally unjustified, and also refuse to acknowledge the fact that, well, states spy either on or through other states. I mean, nobody wants to talk about this guy who was a CIA agent that was in the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. What is he doing there? Well, he's doing what countries do. They spy on or through other countries,
Does he
even
have a name?
allies. Pardon?
Does he have a name?
Absolutely, he has a name. Do you know how I found out about him?
Is it public? I'm saying, like, is it known or?
He came back to the United States and sued the CIA for inadequate retirement. And one of the things that he proposed, what he said to the court in New York, was that he helped catch me. And the court
Is his name
affirmed,
public?
yes, his name is public.
Are you allowed to
And
say
by
it?
the
Or you're
way,
not allowed to say it.
and by the way, he's back here in Israel.
Are you allowed to say it, or you can't say it?
I have to be careful about that. I have to be very careful.
Interesting.
But it's a matter of public record that he
Understood.
sued the CIA, and the judge said that the case should be litigated in camera behind closed doors. But all of his assertions of his service to the CIA, particularly with regard to me, were accurate, credible, and accurate. And
Jonathan Pollard, I appreciate you taking the time here. I hope that people learn a little bit about your history and also your views on it, and provides a little bit of clarity beyond what was said in the New York Times or other publications. And I hope to have you back in the next couple of months. We'll see when
my pleasure.
if and when you officially launch.
Thank you. My pleasure. Be well.
Thank you.